Hi, this is Steve Addison for the Movements Podcast, the podcast for people who want to multiply disciples and churches everywhere. Well, today we're in beautiful Wollongong, about an hour and a half south of Sydney, talking to Dave Milne about tracking our progress down under.
Multiplication began quite a long time ago for me. In about 94, 95, God got my attention as an emerging evangelist that we really weren't just to evangelize people, we were meant to disciple people. And then I became aware that the Great Commission has got this built-in pattern of multiplication. So we've kind of been on a long journey looking for methods or processes or a spirituality that would enable us to multiply disciples. And the first, I guess, group that I saw doing this well many years ago were the Cell Church guys. So we got involved with Cell Church because the idea was that the substance of church could remain the same, but the form of church could morph into any discipling kind of need or pattern that was appropriate to the target group. Anyway, we began down that line, but we really didn't find the kind of success that we would have liked through the Cell Church paradigm in the Australian context, probably because we were comparing ourselves with the best examples of Cell Church around the world against what we were learning and finding here in Australia. And I guess it's true to say we were pretty disillusioned at a point. And then this gentleman, Steve Addison, in about 2011 rang me up and said, "Dave, do you want to come up and learn about T4T?" And I said, "T for what?" And so we got together, and that began a journey looking at CPM, church planting movements, from about 2011, 2012, that really put together some of the pieces that we'd been learning in our Cell Church days and built them into a coherent, prayerful, Christ-centered paradigm that gave us a track to run on and a way to get started. So around that time, we realised that there were some things we were doing well, and and there were some things we really weren't doing at all that we should have been doing when we compare what we're doing in Cell Church over and against the CPM paradigm. So I guess that was the entry, and it's been a long journey up till now. Okay. And I really had no idea what T4T was at that time. But we'd come across George Patterson's 7 Commands of Christ through some early CRM material, and we'd used some of that, and I'd given that away to a few people for them to try. And then after that experience, I think late 2011, we had Bill Smith out in 2012, around about the June, and that was a life-changing event. You know, you go and spend 2 weeks with someone like Bill and a bunch of other keen beans, and you start learning stories, memorizing stories, and it just started to change the way we thought about things. And I guess the key thing that we learned at that point was wide sowing. Wasn't the first time I'd heard about it, but truly we didn't know how to do it. And we learnt some things about wide sowing, and we got some ideas about how to get started that weren't culturally weird. They were quite appropriate, and we began widely sowing the gospel. And that's been transformative. I would say we're not really as excited about it as we would like to be in terms of multiplication of churches. However, the thing that actually has happened is that there are a lot more people now sharing a lot more gospel. And while we've got more prayer happening, I think we could be doing better things with our prayer. But we are baptising more people, and the people we've trained are now baptising people. And the people that they've trained are now also propagating some of the CPM paradigm as they understand it through their Christian network and through their non-Christian network. So we're seeing a ripple out effect and numbers of churches starting to pick this up, but not as many as we would like, but it's certainly growing. Yeah. Okay. Well, the impetus for the research was created because I'm in some online dialogues with a variety of people across Australia, And anecdotally, I was hearing that we were sharing faith. Some people were making commitments to Christ, but we really weren't finding it easy to form new churches and then multiply those churches. So we're kind of hearing that anecdotally, and I thought, well, let's go and find out really what's happening out in the field. And so it was, I guess, from not hearing as many good stories as I would like, that we went to do the research to try and add some rigour to what was becoming a significant investment for a lot of people. And late 2016, I heard about one group who were saying, look, yeah, we have multiplied churches. We are getting to second and third generation. Among 16 churches, a second or third generation. And I wanted to try and find some good stories to help the rest of us get better at what we were doing. So I went and conducted some semi-structured interviews with people who were, fairly serious practitioners with a lot of skin in the game.
Okay. And what did you learn from that that research?
What did I learn? Well, I guess just to give you an overview, first of all, I interviewed 14 groups and conducted 17 interviews across those 14 groups. And I found that of those 14 groups, primarily who are represented by the individuals or leaders that I interviewed, or perhaps a couple that I interviewed, they have between them 151 groups or churches with around about 550 people in those groups and churches. Around about 10% of that cohort was baptised in the last 2 years. And so they are starting to form groups. Of the 14 that I interviewed, 13 of the 14 actually had formed first-generation groups, and 5 of them had second-generation groups, and 2 of them had third-generation groups. And there were 2 stories in particular that were quite outstanding, I think, compared to the others of us who have been practicing. And I then really focused quite heavily on interviewing those 2 particular ministry groups to find out what was going on for them to help us understand some of the principles that might work in Australia. So that was my approach.
Okay, so what did you learn from those 2 standout groups?
One group are working in a university. So they're working among foreign and overseas students primarily. So the target group is a group that's well known to be quite open to the gospel, quite responsive to the gospel. And they began a transition toward the CPM, Father's Heart, Four Fields paradigm in around about 2012, 2013. And they've had some quite significant success. So before applying these simple CPM principles, they were seeing about 20 people make a commitment to Christ per annum. But since they applied the patterns, they saw 30 in 2014, 60 commitments in 2015, and then 97 in 16. So 30, 60, 97. It's a pity the last one wasn't 100, because then it would be 30, 60 or 100-fold. And so they were seeing, and most of those commitments to Christ were instigated through students who'd been trained. So as they equipped students, gave them a vision that they could do this, gave them some simple tools to do this, and then anticipated that they would immediately share their experience of Jesus and a gospel of Jesus message with their friends, they began to see momentum, and they began to see people become followers of Jesus. And then last year, for example, in May they had 18 groups, but by October they had 50 groups. So they were then learning how to form those students who are making commitments to Christ into groups. And this seemed to be happening as students could see other students who just become followers of Jesus starting to lead a group, and they thought, oh, I can do this, because and they were then willing to have a go themselves. So there was a visible group of people who were doing this, available on campus. Most of these groups were happening on campus. Plus, a continuous reinforcing of the vision from the front in a large meeting that they held once a week, and a continuous reiteration of the principles and the practices and the process through training. And this then, has begun to gather momentum. And it's very exciting. And my friend who I interview here would be pointing to God and pointing to the fact that they've been prayerful and that it's a blessing of God, and that he's actually working through the students to bring about this kind of dynamic momentum.
Okay. And how about the other group? What did you learn from them?
The other group are working with migrants and lower socioeconomic Australians, and also now starting to work among middle Australia, middle to upper class Australia. So up until about 2013, they were seeing 10 churches form per annum, 10 to 20 churches form per annum. But last year, between January and October, they saw about 50 formed. Mm-hmm. Now that's been typical, I think, for the last 3 years or so. Fairly significant numbers of churches being formed. And so I asked, what changed for you between, say, 2012, when you were getting 10 to 20, and today, when you're getting up to 50 or more, just between January and October? And this group have been probably practicing CPM principles in Australia for longer than anyone else, so they've persevered for a long time. God has honed them. I'd say, my friend would say, he's humbled. He would say, nothing happens without the Holy Spirit. This is the work of the Holy Spirit. But then I asked, well, what are you doing differently? You must be doing something differently. And he said, well, a person of peace search for us is really an opportunity to go for a walk around our community and love people. Mm-hmm. So when we're walking around our community, we're not so much looking for targets to download gospel. We're looking for opportunities to be a blessing in the community, to connect with people, and we'll share Jesus, a message of Jesus, with them when we can. And so that's been a shift for them. But you've got to realise that they've had standard CPM principles and framework operating for quite a long time. So that's one of the last tweaks. The other tweak that they added that made them fruitful was, I think they honed their gospel presentation to being something more effective for Australia. And it's not a simple, small gospel presentation. It actually involves 3 facets. And my friend was using 3 circles as a filter to find people who were interested to know some more. He didn't feel that there was probably enough information in the 3 circles presentation for someone to make a commitment to Christ. So he would find people who would respond to the 3 circles message, and they would say, yes, I'd like to be in the circle back here with God. And he'd say, okay, well, let's go and talk some more. He'd take them aside, then draw on another gospel presentation, such as share Jesus without fear, and slow it down and get them into some Bible passages, or the Romans Road or what have you, and get them interacting with text more slowly. And then after doing that, he would take them to a little drawing called Lordship Circles that helps them understand what it means to actually invite Jesus into the centre of your life as Lord. And he said these 2 visual tools, 3 circles plus the Lordship Circles, were really helpful in helping crystallise what it meant to actually invite Jesus up front into your life as Lord. And in that gospel presentation, he's front-loading all aspects of the gospel. He's front-loading baptism, he's front-loading obedience, he's front-loading 3 circles has going and sharing what you know of God. So these things aren't added on later on as a surprise. They're actually all part of the original gospel presentation. And so when people were saying yes, they really knew what they were saying yes to. And because these tools were clear, the people who had learnt them and made a commitment to Christ were then able to take them straight into their oikos or into their friendship network and begin to pay the message forward down the line. So that was around group formation. He was doing some slightly different things to other people in that gospel presentation. But also I would say in terms of how do you form your groups, other people were trying to amalgamate non-homogeneous group people or friendships into one group, whereas he would just work with the friendship group rather than try and combine disparate people groups. Over time, he had found that didn't work. So, okay, your oikos. Who's in your oikos? Tell me about your oikos. When do you meet? When do you meet normally? Well, we meet around meal times. Okay, well, let's add church to when you're already meeting rather than try and create a separate time to do church. And so church was often happening within family groups around meal times. And that little tweak seemed to work quite well for them. So how big does the church grow? Well, how big is the oikos? If it's a church among Australians, the church might be 4, 5 or 6 people. The oikos is not particularly big, maybe 3 people. But if it's among perhaps some of the new Australians where the oikos is quite big, the church is quite large. So my friend relates one church group with 12 people coming to visit him, and that's just one family. So there's a lot of people in some of those church groups.
The smaller groups, is he finding they're viable? Because I know in some other fields they're sort of saying, well, we can get a group started with 3 or 4 people, but if we can't get to 5 or 6, either couples or singles, as units, if we can't get to that threshold, it's very hard longer term for it to sustain. Do you know, is there enough information to know if that's the case?
I think there's some information, but because the research is limited in terms of its self-report and it's done in a time frame, really some more investigation could be done in that area. But I did ask that question, and my friend said that small groups can last for a long time if there's genuine fellowship and koinonia within the group. If they really get fellowship with Christ, if they really get fellowship with Jesus, they will stick. He spoke of the competing dominant attractional church paradigm as being the main concern, that he was losing people into the conventional or traditional church after maybe 3 generations if they were Australians, or maybe 6 generations if they were not Australians. Not Australian of new Australian background. Yeah, not Australian born. Yeah, so I do think that there's a contribution of the small size. It would appear, and I think that we do have a problem in Australia among Australian-born people of having small oikoses that are fragmented. And for example, if you and I were to draw out our oikos map, some of the people within our oikos map, they may not actually know each other. We're the only connecting point that they have, and that's very typical. Whereas in some of these ethnic communities, that's not the case. Or in the village situation, it's not the case. People tend to know each other quite well. So we've got some issues in Australia in terms of the fragmented and the low social cohesion within our networks that need to be worked on and resolved.
Because you've sort of taken it's still early days in Australia, but you've taken the pulse of where people are applying the training and going after multiplication, no place left. What do you think we're doing well?
Well, of the 14 people I spoke to, all of them have a wide set of people that they're now connecting with, more so than they would have been before they began interacting within the CPM or DMM framework. So extraordinary number of connections. There are people being prayed for in the street. People are hearing gospel in the street. People's friends are now hearing more gospel than they perhaps would have been. So I think we're doing quadrants 1 and 2 quite well in terms of getting out there and connecting and sowing. Just one other thing that I would say about the good case study in Australia is that he was working toward multiplication through helping people understand lostness and own lostness personally. So if you start, say, a first-generation church, they were competent to start or would initiate, engage in second and third generation church starting once they took ownership for lostness. So you could tell them the parable, say, of the lost son or the lost coin. It's a little bit abstract. But if you say, well, who are the people that you know who are far from God, and what's their destiny without Christ? And if they own that lostness, they'd pay it forward. So there's a pocket of doing something really well that helps the new generation pay it forward. The thing I think we're doing well is we actually are starting to form first generation groups. So all the people except one admitted to having first generation groups. The person who said they didn't have any was being pretty hard on themselves, and others might have countered it. But anyway, everyone's got first generation groups, and that's a very exciting thing. So I'm excited about that. But really, there's only a few who are starting to see multiplication.
Yeah. What do you think needs to be different, or what do we need more of?
So the first one is this. I think that our church formation lessons have to take into account some of the idiosyncrasies of the Australian post-Christian, post-church context. And they have to, I think, undo some of the old paradigm of church, and they have to allow people to actually form community. So when Jesus refers to church in the New Testament, his favourite paradigm or image for church is family, brothers and sisters, and that was the tightest relational bond in the ancient world. And I think that many of the people in Australia, and even some of our CPM friends, me included, when we think of church, we think of a voluntary gathering that is an optional gathering for me that I may or may not go to if I choose to. Whereas church, if we're brothers and sisters in Christ, we're going to stick together. We're like glue. We've got skin in the game on each other's behalf. We're going to be for each other fully. And I think that we've divorced salvation from our church. You know, soteriology and ecclesiology are divorced in a lot of our gospel presentations. They need to be intrinsically linked. So our church formation actually has to help people understand that. Now, that's some speculation there. And I think there are probably other things that could be included in your church formation lessons that may undo some of the issues with cohesion. The second thing I think we can do is explore small house church type gatherings and larger social space type gatherings, so that people see that they're not part of they see they're part of something bigger. The danger here is that the larger meeting will very quickly trump the smaller meeting, and the responsibility that people take in the smaller meeting to pay for the gospel could be eclipsed by the attendance at the large meeting. It tends to actually absorb a lot of resources. So we need to find a way of doing larger meetings that don't detract from our capacity and our concern for lostness. That's critical. And there are some models out there that a few people are starting to explore with, and I'm pretty excited about that. The next thing I think is to provide good mentoring for our church leaders, and make sure we're looking after our church leaders and not let them go too early off on their own, but to continue to mentor those individuals well with one-on-one support after the church starts. And I think maybe some of us are releasing people a little bit early to go off and do this. So there are three domains that I think we could work on around the church formation. And the last thing that I think is a matter of process, and a lot of us have been doing iron on irons, where we would get together and we'd talk about what we're doing, what we're learning. But it seems to me that when we've been doing those, we perhaps move too quickly through people's stories. We move too quickly through what they're learning and what they're stuck. And I think we need to go slower and allow people more time to unpack really what's going on, so we can get in touch with where they're really seeing success and where they're really stuck. Because I don't think anyone's really cracking it in the post-Christian urban context. Not here yet. There are a couple of good stories from overseas and we can learn from them. But I think that team of teams and group learning kind of context is quite important. The other thing that I haven't mentioned till now is that it seems that people who do well have got good mentors and are part of a learning team. So some of the guys who I felt were really struggling in the interview process were very isolated, had no mentors and didn't team much. But those that seemed to be doing well had mentors, were involved in dialogue, had done hard yards, but had persevered. And so, when I asked guys, some of the guys who are level 5, really senior guys offshore, they mentioned 6 to 8 years in a Western context seems to lead toward breakthrough. So that doesn't mean that each of us needs to be in the field for 6 to 8 years. It just means that some of us do, to find out what to do so that others who come on board can quickly start to learn.